Next up, we have Camerupt. Iconic as Maxie's signature Pokemon in Ruby, Emerald, and Omega Ruby, this Bactrian volcano Campbell has been an underrated favorite since it erupted onto the scene in Gen 3. Make sure not to anger it lest you make it spew its 18,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 10,000 degrees Celsius molten lava all over your living room carpet. Today we're going to see how far that sort of hot fury got Camerupt in the competitive scene. And so, we ask, how good was Camerupt actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. No unfortunately here, because Camerupt had a legitimate niche in its debut generation's OU. It wasn't a metagame staple or anything, but it was good at what it did, and the qualities it brought to the table were important ones. It had the excellent unique defensive trait of being immune to electric, but unlike most other ground types, it was neutral to both ice and grass. This meant that no matter which hidden power Zapdos chose, it wouldn't be breaking through Camerupt. Its fire typing also granted it an immunity to Will-O-Wisp, one of the most difficult moves to answer in the entire game, especially for physical offense teams. Since it was immune, resistant, or neutral to anything Gengar could use, Camerupt was a terrific check to it as well. Thanks to its ability Magma Armor, it couldn't even be frozen by Ice Punch. Being able to switch in almost for free against two of the biggest threats in the metagame was no joke. As if that wasn't enough, Camerupt was also an offensive threat in its own right, possessing strong attacking stats and a great stab combination. Its first Fire Blast was well regarded as an underrated dangerous weapon in advance, as it mowed through many tier staples such as Metagross, Skarmory, Jirachi, and Celebi. Other tier staples such as Tyranitar and Blissey didn't mind Fire Blast at all, but they didn't want to eat Camerupt's other stab, Earthquake. Now you may be thinking, well, didn't Camerupt just get stuffed by the tier's abundance of water types? It can't even safely run Hidden Power Grass for the quad weak Swampert, because then it gets walled by Salamence. Well, that wasn't a problem because Camerupt's last move was the devastating Explosion, which cleaved through anything that didn't resist it, namely those pesky water types. It was especially dangerous because Camerupt's stab combination destroyed every normal resist in the tier. Tyranitar didn't want to take Earthquake, Steels didn't want to take either, and Gengar wasn't a Camerupt switch-in at all, meaning that Camerupt was consistently able to get off an Explosion on a neutral target, which translated to a KO. As for the coverage problem, Camerupt could run Hidden Power Ice, as it didn't want Swampert switching out of it into Salamence and forcing Camerupt to blow up on Salamence instead, as Swampert was far more of a roadblock to Camerupt's physical sweeping teammates than Salamence was. Camerupt actually wanted Swampert to stay in on it, unable to pivot to Salamence so it could explode on it. But that said, the Swampert-Salamence pairing wasn't the most common thing ever, so Camerupt could feasibly run Hidden Power Grass to make itself more of a threat against Swampert teams lacking Salamence. It could also bypass Hidden Power coverage issues by running Toxic. No Steel or Poison type would want to switch into Camerupt, and Immunity Snorlax wasn't crazy about the idea either, so it was reliable at crippling something. The only problem was that it took a little longer for the poison to take hold, and Camerupt preferred faster games, but it was still a fine choice. Of course, Camerupt had serious flaws holding it back. It had low speed alongside poor natural bulk, making it difficult to EV effectively in order to do its job both offensively and defensively. It also had a crippling weakness to the ubiquitous Earthquake, which was especially nasty when it was trapped by Dugtrio, a common partner to Zapdos and Gengar, who were the Pokemon Camerupt was supposed to be checking. This could throw a wrench in that plan. However, Camerupt could bypass these issues. It wasn't meant to hard counter Zapdos and Gengar throughout a game, or even last that long, as it was meant to act as a buffer for its offensive teammates that weren't able to switch into them and dish out offense in return, which was easy given its threatening stab combination that complemented a powerful Explosion so well. Being able to turn Zapdos and Gengar into an opportunity for a favorable offensive trade was unique as it was useful. Its flaws could hinder it, yes, and thus Camerupt's niche was rather small in the grand scheme of things, but it certainly wasn't a gimmick. It was a solid offensive Pokemon that did what nothing else could and was a legitimate tournament-worthy choice in advanced OU. Having said that, since Camerupt wasn't used very often, it fell to UU, and there it was also quite good. Funnily enough, it struggled to switch in as consistently as it did in OU, since the targets it switched in on in UU weren't as common as its targets in OU, but it did have points of entry against several solid Pokemon, like Vileplume, Electabuzz, Electrode, Ninetales, and Muck. Also, funnily enough, it was easier to safely check it, as Soul Rock and Lunatone had the unique properties of resisting Camerupt's stab combination as well as explosion. However, they weren't immovable. They could be chipped by Hidden Power Grass or crippled by Toxicroak. A lack of Hidden Power Ice would leave Camerupt walled by Altaria, whose natural cure meant it didn't fear Toxic either. But Altaria was of course destroyed by Explosion, which made Camerupt a fine wall breaker, able to take out either Altaria or another defensive Pokemon like Blastoise for a teammate to abuse. Camerupt still had its flaws of course, with its low speed in conjunction with a miserable defense stat and crippling water weakness, making it difficult to find opportunities against common kinds of offensive teams in physical offense and rain dance abuse respectively, but it also shone against other kinds, namely Sunny Day and Electric Spam. Overall, Camerupt was a fine Pokemon in Advanced UU, capping off a solid debut generation where its unique typing shone to the fullest. The 4th generation brought Heatran, which was a better Camerupt in pretty much every way, and meant our beloved Camel could no longer eke out a niche in OU. And things weren't so easy in UU either. The metagame was rife with top tier fire types in Arcanine, Moltres, Blaziken, and Houndoom, famed for their ability to cut through the mighty Venusaur and Registeel. Camerupt couldn't hope to match their levels of dominance, as it was slow as well as frail, making it easily bowled over by much of the metagame. It could attempt to circumvent its speed with Rock Polish, but it was so slow that it would still be outsped by just about every choice Scarfer. Not to mention its frailty still came into play against the tier's plethora of priority attacks, especially with Life Orb recoil piling on. It crumpled to Arcanine's extreme speed, Blaziken and Toxicroak's vacuum wave, and most definitely Azumarill and Kabutops' quadruple effective Aqua Jet. Camerupt was fairly threatening on Trick Room teams, but Trick Room teams themselves were infamous for their lack of consistency. However, Camerupt did have one seriously significant advantage over its fellow fire types: Explosion, which meant it could bait in and destroy the bane of all fires in Milotic. It didn't even have to nail it on the switch. With the combination of the new Pastro Berry having the power of super effective water moves and its new ability Solid Rock decreasing the power of super effective moves as a whole, it could survive even a quadruple effective Surf after Stealth Rock damage to blow Milotic to smithereens, letting it play like a UU version of Heatran. Thanks to Stab Earthquake, it didn't have to worry about Arcanine walling it either. Against Stall, Explosion could also threaten to take out the seemingly immovable Chansey. Gen 4 UU is famous for giving just about everything a niche, and Camerupt was no exception. While it wasn't a face of the metagame, it was still a legitimate Pokemon that could be used to great effect by a smart trainer. That said, its lack of a true niche meant it wasn't used much, and as such, it dropped to NU. And while it didn't dominate there, it was now a part of the main metagame, so to speak. It still had strong fire-type competition, this time with Tier King Charizard, as well as the dangerous Typhlosion and Magmortar, but Camerupt was not outclassed for a number of reasons. It was a unique offensive threat. With Explosion, it lured and destroyed Slowking, which opened up a ton of possibilities for teammates like Medicham, while its Stab Earth power meant it blew through Regirock a lot more easily than its fellow fires, who would have to sacrifice an important move slot for the famously unreliable Focus Blast. It was also a huge threat on Trick Room teams, which were actually a consistent choice in NU. However, Camerupt wasn't just an offensive Pokemon. It was a great defensive one. With full HP and special defense investment, it was one of the incredibly rare Pokemon that could utterly wall the massively powerful, massively dangerous Specs Magneton with its Thunderbolt immunity and resistance to Flash Cannon. Magneton would never dare to get cheesy and run Hidden Power Water for it either, as it needed HP Grass to beat Gastrodon and Quagsire too badly. Camerupt was also a great check to its fellow fire types, and it was generally a lot more difficult to take down via the many special attackers in the tier, such as Gardevoir's and Grumpig's Psychic, making it a great switch into Will-O-Wisping Gardevoir sets. Specially defensive Camerupt wasn't just a great hit taker either. While its focus on defensive investment as opposed to offensive meant it wasn't going to be dishing out much direct damage, it was able to cripple the opposition with debilitating passive damage. Its many opportunities to switch in made it a great user of Stealth Rock, and it was easily able to distribute burns with Stab Lava Plume. It had some flexibility too. Earth Power was a solid default for secondary stab, but if its team had a different Stealth Rock user, Camerupt could opt for the Toxic Protect combination, dishing out even more passive damage and gaining extra recovery to boot. In its last slot, it usually went with Explosion, and while this may seem contradictory for a defensive Pokemon, it was still useful for allowing Camerupt to take an opposing threat down with it when it dropped to low health. Overall, Camerupt was a terrific Pokemon in DPP NU. It was underappreciated, but a great choice nonetheless. Gen 5 clobbered Camerupt, as Explosion's power was halved and a shocking wave of power creep rolled in, which is generally not a good thing for a slow, frail Pokemon like Camerupt. As a result, it's humbled to NU once again, which was a lower placement than the previous generation, since RU now existed between it and UU. With its offensive prowess neutered by the Explosion nerf, Camerupt primarily used its specially defensive set, which set up the ever-important Stealth Rock and covered some really important Pokemon. Most notably, not only did it stave off Rotom Frost and Rotom Fan, but its electric immunity also prevented them from grabbing free momentum via Volt Switch. Piloswine also did this, as well as packing immense bulk with Eviolite, but Camerupt distinguished itself with its ability to recover with leftovers, ignore Will-O-Wisp burns with its fire typing, and check the ever-dangerous Charizard. Camerupt was also great on hazard stacking teams thanks to its synergy with Eviolite Roselia. It would set up rocks as the opponent switched to a water type, then it could escape to Roselia, who would follow up with spikes, putting a lot of pressure on the opponent's switches in very few turns. That said, the influx of waters and powerful physical attackers made Camerupt's defensive utility more limited than in the previous generation. However, it was still a legitimate choice worth using. It also had one other set it could use, despite being riskier, which was Choice Specs with Eruption. Its low speed in conjunction with Eruption's reliance on high HP to do damage made it somewhat challenging to pull off effectively, but when it worked, it 2-hit KO'd pretty much the entire tier, even the mighty Alomomola. It wasn't entirely reliant on Eruption either, as Specs Fire Blast was still a seriously strong attack, mauling bulky Pokemon like Mandibuzz, while Earth Power absolutely destroyed Regirock, and Hidden Power Grass ripped Seismitoad apart. Overall, Camerupt didn't have as prominent a place in Black and White NU as the tier's big guns, but when it did show up, it proved that it was a Pokemon worth using, as a defensive pivot, and on occasion, as a Choice Specs user with power of volcanic proportions. Camerupt was largely passed over by XY, but come Oraz, it gained what every Pokemon desired, a Mega Evolution. Its already miserable speed was dropped even further, but in exchange it received much appreciated buffs to both defenses, as well as a monstrous boost to its special attack, which was indirectly boosted even further thanks to sheer force, which powered up its Stab Fire Blast and Earth Power even more. It also received an attack boost, but it was never going to use it thanks to its absolutely astronomical power on the special side. It sadly wasn't enough to get it into OU, or even UU for that matter, but it hit its stride in RU. However, we'll come back to that because despite being more than viable in the tier, it wasn't used that often. Yet another anomaly of the Pokemon tiering rung, and it dropped to NU, and there it was absolutely excellent. It was one of the tier's mere 2 megas, and since the other one was the stall-specific Autono, Camerupt didn't have much competition. It was ludicrously difficult to switch into, as Earth Power complemented Fire Blast ridiculously well, smashing through just about every resist to the latter. The only exception was the occasional Mantine, who was niche and got dropped by Hidden Power Electric or Rock Slide, or crippled by Will-O-Wisp. Camerupt could do it all, supporting with Stealth Rock, staying healthy in the face of repeated hits with Rest Talk since it only really needed its stabs to be a massive threat, or simply going the all-out attacking route, possibly even opting for Substitute so it could safely blast the switch in with the correct attack as opposed to a more prediction-reliant approach. Camerupt was such a threat that teams needed to prevent it from switching in, lest it blast a huge hole in their team, leading to adaptations such as Hidden Power Water on Rotom Fan and regular Rotom. However, even this wasn't enough. Camerupt continued to dominate. Plus, it wasn't like Rotom could just Hidden Power Water and Camerupt would drop. Rotom had to hit Camerupt on the switch for a 2-hit KO, as otherwise Camerupt would survive the HP Water and easily KO back. Camerupt's low speed didn't bother it too much either, as it got plenty of opportunity to switch in against common Pokemon like Xatu and Ferroseed. It was suspect tested several times. It initially just narrowly avoided a ban, but eventually enough of the player base saw how unhealthy a metagame presence it was, and it was banned. Funnily enough, even if Mega Camerupt hadn't been banned from NU, it would have left it eventually. As we said earlier, it was a strong Pokemon in RU, and as more and more players caught on, it was used more and more. They expected that it wouldn't even need a suspect test in NU, because it would just naturally become an RU Pokemon. They were partially correct, as after it was sent from NU to the NU ban list, Mega Camerupt continued its upward usage trend in the tier above, and achieved enough usage to become a genuine RU Pokemon in its own right. It had some defensive defensive utility, as it completely walled Magneton and Jolteon and blocked their Volt Switch, while soft-checking dangerous offensive threats in Durant, Escavalier, Venusaur, and Virizion. This meant that even with its abysmal speed, it had utility against offense. However, its most notable niche was utterly dominating balanced teams. It was easily able to take advantage of Registeel and Bronzong's existence to launch its nuclear attacks, effortlessly blasting through Registeel and Bronzong's common teammates like Slowking, Alomomola, and Jellicent, as they didn't want to eat its monstrous Earth power, and Flygon was dropped by Hidden Power Ice, while Camerupt's Stealth Rock neutrality meant it wasn't easy to wear down, and its combination of good bulk alongside a dark neutrality meant pursuing it with Sneasel wasn't going to make it go away. As such, it was one of the best Pokemon against one of RU's best, most popular team styles. Now, of course, Camerupt had its issues, mainly its low speed and exploitable groundwater weaknesses, and now it wasn't the only excellent offensive Mega, as Glalie was also a huge part of the tier. Plus, Emboar was also a strong Stealth Rock neutral fire type that didn't take up the Mega slot. However, in spite of this, Mega Camerupt was a powerful presence in RU that was nigh guaranteed to get 1 KO if not more. As for regular Camerupt, with power creep setting in once again, it dropped to the new tier below NU, that being PU. There it was a devastating wall breaker, as it took advantage of many common defensive staples such as Mawile, Bronzor, and Roselia. Once it got on the field, something was dropping to its brutal choice specs attacks, especially if it was a high enough health to launch a fully powered Eruption. The only thing that could truly switch into Eruption was Flash Fire Ninetales, which was of course completely destroyed by Earth Power. Altaria was a decent switch in, but Camerupt often ran Hidden Power Ice, so it was by no means safe, and it was difficult to predict the HP Ice because Camerupt could so easily go for Eruption and lose almost nothing. Camerupt wasn't merely an offensive Pokemon though. It could use its old specially defensive set to become an effective Stealth Rocker that could use its Volt Switch immunity and Ice neutrality to counter Rotom Frost, arguably the best Pokemon in the tier. It was invaluable defensive utility. Overall, Camerupt was a highly useful Pokemon in ORAS PU on both offense and defense, rounding out a solid generation for it. The advent of its new Mega Evolution roused Camerupt from its long dormant VGC slumber, giving it a place in a metagame that had long been unfriendly to it. At first glance, Camerupt's weaknesses are only exacerbated in doubles. While Camerupt only has 2 weaknesses, they're not particularly favorable ones. A ground weakness and a double weakness to water certainly aren't doing it any favors when it comes to spread moves. However, Camerupt's strengths get a boost as well. The relative ease of setting up Trick Room in doubles compared to singles means it can fully flex its monstrous power levels when considering its explosive special attack and sheer force. Mega Camerupt was virtually always fitted out with Earth Power, and it had a choice for its second stab move. Eruption let it channel the days of 2013's Eruption Heatran, while Heat Wave gave Camerupt slightly more reliable power in exchange for unreliable accuracy. Most players still opted for Heat Wave, as sheer force meant Heat Wave was likely stronger unless Camerupt was at full health. Protect was of course absolutely necessary, but Camerupt had a few choices for its last move. Fire Blast could provide an absolutely volcanic level of power in order to bypass opposing wide guard users and one-hit KO threats like Heatran, while Hidden Power Ice was useful against the common dragon types of the format. And Ancient Power could be used to remove common fire types that were double weak to rock, such as Mega Charizard Y, Talonflame, and Volcarona. Mega Camerupt brought virtually unparalleled firepower to the field, but it was at a cost. It was of course absolutely necessary to run it in Trick Room, and its crippling weaknesses necessitated the proper team support. What's more, while Mega Camerupt's power was overwhelming, leaving an opponent standing usually meant it would get return KO'd, meaning it greatly appreciated additional power from the likes of Sun or Helping Hand. Using Camerupt almost necessitated using a Storm Drain Pokemon like Gastrodon and Cradily, as well as Trick Room setters like Cofagrigus or Cresselia, who could provide Helping Hand along with its speed warping powers. Not to mention you were giving up your Mega slot for it. As you can see, it takes a village to make Camerupt work, and as such, its top cut performances were sparse. Nevertheless, Camerupt still had a few hotspot performances. We'll address its pair of regional top 8s here. Amar Bay gave it a 6th place finish in Missouri on an innovative team that also included Swords Dance Ferrothorn and Faint Hariyama, while Jeremy Bell took it to 7th at Brisbane Regionals, pairing it with fellow spread move abuser Sylveon and fellow fire type Talonflame. Finally, Camerupt was able to leave its mark on the world stage as well, as Phil Boom Guy Nguyen locked in a 21st place finish on a dual Mega team with Mega Salamence. Boom Guy also highly favored Priority to give his team some offensive presence outside of Trick Room. Bisharp and Amoonguss kept the pressure up, while Amoonguss provided necessary redirection, and Cresselia brought the requisite Trick Room and helping hand to the table. Boom Guy also made two Camerupt choices of note. He chose Ancient Power to beat Mega Charizard Y, and also opted for Magma Armor as its pre-Mega ability, citing regular Camerupt's terrible defenses as negating Solid Rock's usage anyways, and favoring the slight safety of Magma Armor, protecting him from switching into Ice Beam. And despite its small success in 2015, Camerupt wasn't able to get things done in 2016. And understandably so, since it was virtually worthless against any Kyogre it was unlucky enough to run into, and its typing made it completely redundant to Primal Groudon. Nevertheless, for a Pokemon that had no business in VGC at all beforehand, Camerupt's Gen 6 outing was enough to be proud of. Sun and Moon came and brought with them power creep, as every generation does, but somehow the stars aligned so that Mega Camerupt actually had a niche in OU. How, you ask? Well, everyone was tripping over themselves trying to figure out how to handle Magearna, and turns out Mega Camerupt was near perfect at it, resisting its floor cannon and even blocking its Volt Switch. It similarly stonewalled Tapu Koko while switching into and threatening other common bulky Pokemon like Clefable and Mega Scizor. It wasn't just a check to these Pokemon though. It was insanely difficult to switch into. The most common defensive combination, Toxapex and Celesteela, stood no chance against its stabs, nor did the Tangrowth that everyone seemed to be running. Mega Camerupt was also an excellent abuser of OU's various terrains, set by the ever-common Tapus. Defensively, it loved grassy terrain providing passive recovery and weakening earthquakes aimed at it, allowing it to stay in on and destroy Lander's T. But the main reason it loved them so much was because of Nature Power, which gave it a devastating extra coverage. In grassy terrain, it absolutely mauled Rotom, and in electric terrain, it throttled Mantine. Now, it was still a niche pick in the grand scheme of things, but it did its job exceedingly well and saw some serious tournament usage. But sadly, this niche died out when Ultra Sun and Moon came around. But for the first time since its debut in Advanced, Camerupt saw genuine OU usage, using its unique qualities to great effect. Mega Camerupt dropped to RU again, but this time things were a lot rougher for it. It had competition from far more consistent Megas in Blastoise, Sceptile, and Abomasnow, all three of which had superior offensive and defensive traits for the context of the metagame, and this on its own was already a near-death sentence. As if that wasn't bad enough, Camerupt was no longer nigh impossible to switch into safely, as the presence of Milotic and Snorlax in the tier meant it was actually quite easy to wall with commonly used Pokemon. Finally, we've said this before, but it's more appropriate here. The straw that broke the Mega Camerupt's back was that it was just threatened by too many common offensive Pokemon. It was difficult for it to find opportunities against all Metagross, Araquanid, and Rhyperior running around. Of course, even if it did find an opportunity, it would often be for naught when facing a Pokemon that walled it. This meant that despite its ability to check Salazzle and Raikou and threaten out the seemingly unkillable Registeel, Mega Camerupt would just not be able to accomplish much of anything, and thus was not worth using at all in RU. Its only hope was to drop to NU, and that it did. Now the trouble was, it was far too powerful for the tier, and was banned almost as quickly as it dropped. Some time passed, the metagame changed, and the player base decided that Mega Camerupt deserved another shot at the tier. But after several weeks of testing, it was apparent that it would just not be a good idea. It threw the balance of NU completely out of whack. Thus, Mega Camerupt remained in the limbo of NUBL, which is too good for NU, but not good enough for RU. Regular Camerupt didn't have it so hot down in PU either. The metagame was faster and stronger this time around, and Camerupt just couldn't keep up. It was unable to consistently find opportunities to fire off attacks. It had some good traits, like blocking Electros's Volt Switch and threatening defensive staples in Regirock and Ferroseed, but even putting aside the many things that held it back from the Pokemon it was supposed to be good against, notably Electros knocking off its choice specs, Camerupt was just not as consistent as his competition. Victreebel and Aurorus were equally as threatening, but didn't need to walk on eggshells to get onto the field against a limited pool of Pokemon the way Camerupt did. Plus, one didn't need to look far for effective fire types. Combusken and Simisear were excellent Pokemon. Regular Camerupt sadly just got left in the dust and succumbed to the rank, so-called, of untiered. While Camerupt was absent from 2017's Alola Dex format, it made a meager return in 2018, aided by a couple new pals. For one, Mimikyu's near unstoppable Trick Room setting made it a viable alternative to Cresselia, trading additional team support for some power of its own in the form of its never-ending nightmare. But Camerupt's true new best friend was Tapu Bulu, whose synergy with Camerupt was unparalleled as it addressed both of Camerupt's weaknesses in a variety of ways. Of course, Tapu Bulu's own grass typing meant that it could handle both ground and water types with relative ease, but it was grassy terrain that was the true coup. Tapu Bulu reduced Camerupt's weakness to Earthquake without nerfing Camerupt's Earth power, and the grassy surroundings also gave Camerupt access to the coverage move of its dreams, in Nature Power, which turned into an energy ball that could remove both the types it feared the most. Of course, Camerupt still had its fair share of problems, as Landorus was an ever-present threat, and it didn't appreciate Bulu's Tapu brethren Tapu Fini at all. While Camerupt nominally had good matchups against many relevant Pokemon, such as Tyranitar, Metagross, and Landorus under Trick Room, it still couldn't hold all its coverage moves. Running Nature Power meant giving up Ancient Power for Charizard, or Hidden Power Ice for Salamence, and it was still an unquestionably less reliable Mega than other more popular choices. But once again, it had a few proponents who were able to give it good results. Martin Teo finished 5th at the Malaysian Special Event, while Mitchell Davies took home 6th at the Dallas Regionals. However, it was the Costa Mesa Regionals where Camerupt truly had its day, with 2 finishes in the top 8, and in fact a showdown in the quarterfinals where Michael Groshans was able to dispatch Brandon Huang before continuing on to a 2nd place finish. While both players brought Tapu Bulu, Brandon opted for Cresselia as his Trick Room setter and a Scarf Tapu Lele to handle opposing priority users and Landorus. Michael, on the other hand, doubled down on his Trick Room potential, adding Porygon 2 as a 2nd setter alongside his Mimikyu and rounding out his squad with Caracosta and Vivillon. One side note, although Michael wasn't able to clutch out what would have been Mega Camerupt's first ever regional run, he did make history in a different way, by giving regular Camerupt its first ever top cut. Sort of. You see, Mike had picked up the team just days before the event, courtesy of fellow Camerupt user Mitchell Davies, and arrived at Costa Mesa with no practice games on cart. In his first round of Swiss, when going to evolve Camerupt into its mighty Mega form, he was shocked to see that there was no Mega Evolution button to be found, because he had never picked up the Mega Ring after beating the game, and yet Mike still took a game from his round 1 opponent, Brandon Meckley, the very same man who would defeat him in finals after Mike swept through Swiss with his appropriate Mega Stone. And that's the story of how regular Camerupt top cut a tournament. Sort of. Fun fact, Mike's bad luck also continued in Top Cut, where he realized after trading all his Pokemon to the streaming cart that the cart had no Mimikyu Z, but still won his match anyways. Just goes to show you should always persevere, I guess. Or maybe just remember to double check your cartridges. And unlike 2016, Mega Camerupt did have a scattered few appearances in 2019's unrestricted format. Both credit of Yihui Zhu. Yihui was able to place top 16 at Daytona Regionals and 6 at the Hong Kong Regionals with the same Trick Room squad of Mega Ray, Tapu Lele, Stakataka, Palkia, Kartana, and Mega Camerupt. According to Yihui, he had originally been passed the team by Bingji Wang, but with an Incineroar in place of the Camerupt, Yihui opted to replace Incineroar with Camerupt to simplify his game plan against Groudon and Amoonguss, who he could now simply blow up under Trick Room instead of cycling Intimidates or playing a Spore metagame. Yihui also used HP Ice as the last coverage move on Camerupt, giving offensive pressure against opposing Rayquazas. While Yihui didn't bring Camerupt many times, he says the times he did bring it were very helpful. So good going, Camerupt. And that's it. So how good was Camerupt actually? Well, its typing is unique, giving it an incredible set of resistances. In particular, its electric immunity, while being neutral to both grass and ice, is amazing at letting it thwart common electrics. And the effects of that typing have played a significant part in making Camerupt good in whatever metagame it ended up in. It's been mostly a lower tier Pokemon, though it had 2 notable spots in OU. It's been able to play defense nicely several times, but what it's mostly known for is its volcanic stab type coverage and power, sometimes manifesting literally when it gets to unleash Choice Specs Eruption. It was also a shining example of what a Mega Evolution can do for a Pokemon, bringing it success in both singles and even some terrific performances in Gen 6 and 7 VGC. It hit a rough spot in the 7th generation, ironically after it appeared briefly in OU to stop top threat Magearna, but if or when Camerupt returns to Generation 8, the lower amount of Pokemon means it's likely to find success in a lower tier once again. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about Camerupt? How would you improve its base form or its mega form? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.